I am Eduard Grau, and this is the Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ilya.
Hey, Ben. How's it going?
I am doing extra awesomely. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Hey, we have a great show today. We have Eduard Grau on the show, and Edu has actually heard the show. He listens to us. He's a fan, so I know that was
Hi,
wonderful.
Edu. How's it going?
Yeah, no, I mean it was great. Yeah, so he'll definitely be listening to this episode since he already listens to us and he's on the show. but yeah, it's great because sometimes how it is when we talk to people who've never heard the show before, we kind of have to explain what the show's about and how we're doing it and everything else. And it was so easy and so smooth and so great with Edu. He's like, yeah, I know. He's heard it.
I love all of our guests, but when I talk to a guest who's heard the show, there's just less for me to explain to them. So
yeah, absolutely. We get that much more time to chat.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I just like doing less work. That's just me, though.
Just super lazy. Just want to do nothing.
So let's get into our close focus topic for this week, which I think is a lighter thing for us to talk about, but I think it's a really cool thing. And it's the new documentary series on Disney Plus called The Beatles Get Back.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see this. I only watched some of the trailer, but man, it looks like it was remastered beautifully.
Yeah, so I started watching it. I'm not all the way through it, obviously. But what's fascinating is it's about the making of the album Let It Be. And I didn't know any of this about it, but apparently the Beatles set themselves an outrageously short turnaround to do a live taping of their new album, their new material. And, you don't really think about it that much, but I was looking at it. The Beatles put out in like 10 years or something, they put out 12 albums. Those guys were really prolific. And at a certain point, they stopped touring. So at the beginning of this documentary, they kind of explained that they wanted to go back into the studio. What's interesting about this is that there already was a movie made out of this footage, which was shot by Tony Richmond, DP who has actually said he would come on our show at some point, but we haven't gotten him on yet.
We better get on that. So.
Yeah. But he shot this stuff, and they already made a movie about it. But Peter Jackson got into the vault, and they were rolling cameras all day long, nonstop, while they were writing. So you're peering over the shoulders of literally John, Paul, George, and Ringo in their writing process, how they wrote a song. And anyone who's a fan of this podcast, we talk about the creative process. That's what we talk about here. I think you would love this, even though they are making music and not a movie, because you're watching collaboration. You're watching live in-person collaboration. And what's interesting too is that my whole life, the Beatles were just put up on a pedestal as the Titanic gods of pop stardom. And when you watch this, they're just like four dudes trying to make it work. And it looks gorgeous. They retransferred all the original source footage and cleaned it up. That's something Peter Jackson did that with that World War I documentary a couple of years ago. I think he's really good at restoration. And so it almost looks like it could have been shot yesterday. Did you see what I did there? It was shot yesterday.
Also, the title of a great Beatles movie that came out just a couple of years ago. I kind of feel like the Beatles are having a moment. They're kind of everywhere. Apple TV did the Paul McCartney 3-2-1 just a couple of months ago. It's like the Beatles are having some sort of this moment right now of resurgence and nostalgia. And God, I even just watched the Saturday Night Live holiday special, and they ended it with a live performance where Paul McCartney came up out of the audience and joined Bruce Springsteen on stage and did a whole thing. So it's kind of a moment right now for the Beatles. Not like the Beatles ever went away. It's not like they ever did, but all this time and all these years later to still kind of be in the zeitgeist and to be out there. I'm really looking forward to this. It seems like they have such a constricted schedule to make this happen back whenever this was shot 50 years ago.
It's literally 3 weeks. And they make it kind of a deal in the documentary. They show you on the calendar when they started and when the actual show is going to be. So it's you don't even really think about it, but that album's damn near an improv exercise for these guys.
I mean, you have to put restrictions on yourself in order to bring out, I think, the creative juices sometimes. If you just have unlimited time, yes, maybe you can make that work, but actually having to be under a deadline, having to limit your resources and limit whatever's happening, then that becomes where some of the best creativity springs forth. I can't wait.
And also, after being like immersed in studio technology and doing all kinds of like crazy technological stuff in the studio, they wanted it to be something that they could perform live with no studio trickery, which I think is also kind of a cool restriction to put on yourself. Not that, some of my favorite music doesn't rely on like 90% studio trickery, but, I think that there's something to be said of the kind of in-person quality of live performance, like what they wanted to do.
I agree 100%. I think,
and I'm not all the way through it. So, like, I know based on the trailer that at some point George Harrison walks out, and they bring in a pianist who is extremely involved in a lot of their creative process. And there's like a very Frederick Wiseman quality to the way Peter Jackson has put this together. By the way, I think it's a little weird that Peter Jackson is taking directing credit, because obviously he wasn't there when a frame of it was shot. He's just like producing the edit. How do you feel about that? I mean, I'm not crapping on Peter Jackson at all. I just think it's a little odd to call yourself the director when you didn't direct it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you could certainly claim that an editor is very responsible for the story and for how the whole thing turns out in the end.
1,000%. Also, a producer can guide and edit. Any kind of producer. The guy who directed it, his name is Michael Lindsay Hogg, and there is a movie called Let It Be that came out in 1969 that is made from the same footage. So he was the director. He was the guy and he's in the film. You see him in the film. He's the guy who's there on set guiding the documentary process.
Maybe when the footage was sold to Peter Jackson, that was a contingency that he would pay extra, or he would give some amount of money to also then be able to put director credit on this whole thing.
I just think it's an interesting thing. Like, I don't know, if I was taking over somebody else's thing, I don't know that I would want directing credit unless I had a legitimate claim to having directed it. And I think that supervising the edit is a producing and executive producing. It's a lot of things, but Agreed. I don't know that it's directing.
100%. And you could also say, editor. You could take editing credit, even if he didn't work the controls, but he could take editing credit if he was like, shave 2 frames off of this, remove this around, bring this forward, do this and that.
I have heard that Peter Jackson's been working on his editing resume in case the work dries up for him. So
I think he's safe, especially with I just heard September now for another Lord of the Rings thing, a Lord of the Rings television series now or something. So
is he doing that? I
don't know if it's him, but I mean, who knows? But I heard, yes, Lord of the Rings is coming to one of the streaming services.
Maybe we can get Lord of the Rings and the Beatles together somehow.
Well, with Peter Jackson doing this, you're kind of getting a little bit right there. So
cool. So shall we go ahead and get into the interview?
Yeah, let's get into the interview with Eduard Grau.
Here he is.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
Eduard Grau, thank you so much for being on the Cinematography Podcast.
It's a pleasure. Big fan of what you do, guys.
Hey, you've got a new movie that just came out. It's on Netflix. It's called Passing. It's a period piece, and it's directed by Rebecca Hall, first-time director, but longtime actress and star of and co-star of many movies. Tell me a little bit about you and your relationship with Rebecca, because I know you've worked before while you were shooting and she was an actress. How did this project happen?
Yes, I actually did 2 movies with her. One, The Awakening in 2011, and one called The Gift, directed by Joel Edgerton in 2015. And she was the main actress on both films, and she was just a joy to work with. She was one of those actors that are not only about performance, they are filmmakers, they are team players. They are aware of everything that is happening on the frame, everything that is happening on the set and the story, and they put it together in their heads and they help the filmmaking. So it was always clear to me that Rebecca at some point was going to direct, that there was no doubt. She contacted me to do a short film that I was not able to do at the end. And then when the movie happened, it just happened that she called me one day and was like, can you jump on, start prepping, in 2 days? And I jumped on a plane and just fell into the movie, which was a joy. It was an amazing opportunity. So I cannot complain. I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time once again in my life. So I cannot complain.
That is amazing. Okay, so you didn't have a lot of time before prep. Did you at least get some good time during prep then to put this movie together?
Yeah, no. I mean, like I had a normal prep for the movie. You know, it was just like like I think 4 weeks. So I had time to test and to kind of read again and again the script and the book and get into Rebecca's head, which, you know, she had been preparing the movie for 12 years. So she had a very good understanding of all the different elements and different parts of the storytelling needed, you know. So she had worked very hard, and it was actually kind of understanding where she was going and just trying to help to make it happen, to elevate it when I could, to just follow the rules when I had to, and you know, and just be a team player with the rest of the crew. You know, when you have a great leader like Rebecca, it's always easier for cinematography. And this case was exceptional because actually the cinematography is so related to the film itself. It's not only the look of the film, it's also the storytelling, the narrative of it. You know, it's just the movie would be totally different if it was in color, if it was not 4:3. It was like it actually tells so much about the characters and where the movie is that actually it's kind of a dream come true for a cinematographer. So, you know, it was a joy.
Well, we're definitely going to get into the fact that it's a black and white movie, and it's in 4:3, which black and white maybe not necessarily an unheard of choice. And 4:3, it's been done before recently, but I will say that not much. But before we dive into that, I just want to give a quick sort of description of the movie for the people who haven't seen it. So it's based on a book by Nella Larsen, and it's a period drama. How would you go about describing the story?
It's quite difficult, but I would say like two school friends meet after a long time apart, and they realize that they have taken different paths in life, although coming from a very similar place. And it's related to the race and identity, and you know, obviously also femininity and being in Harlem in 1930s, you know.
It's a 1930 Harlem story, sort of upper class women, and basically there's a theme that runs through it, of course, of passing, of black women who are passing for white, in particular one woman and also her childhood friend. My understanding is that Rebecca Hall, her grandfather, passed as white, and that there was like a personal connection with this. Was this a topic at all of conversation, or that something that was brought up during production?
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously one of the questions that everyone asks her, which I think it's somewhat sometimes a little bit unfair. You know, you don't need to be an astronaut to talk. You know, to make a movie about astronauts. Sometimes,
no,
you know,
not at all.
But you know, it is one of those topics that comes, and the truth is that like she had something going on in her family that she didn't totally understand growing up, and it was that her grandfather passed as white for a long time, and her mom always kind of hid it away from her, and until she read Passing, the novel from Nella Larsen, she didn't understand that was actually even a possibility in England, you know. So it was an interesting process for her. It was a personal process as much as a filmmaking process for her, and it's like it was also another element that made it interesting.
And it was a very compact shooting schedule, it sounds like, as well too. Only 23 days. Is that correct? So you had a lot to do in a little time.
Yeah, 23 days and no reshoots, you know. So it was like pre-contained. Shooting in New York is never easy, and yeah, so it was tough. It was not an easy schedule, but it does help when you have a director that is very clear of what she wants, what she needs to tell the story, and the way she wants to tell it, you know. So all those elements did help.
Well, let's talk a little bit about black and white and 4:3. Because I feel like in this case, they kind of go together, but maybe not, maybe for different reasons. Black and white, I'm a huge fan of black and white, and I have to compliment you on your work that you did in black and white, because working in black and white is not the same as working in color. And unless you used a monochrome camera, of which there's very few out there, and I don't know if you did for this, that means that you're having to desaturate or apply some sort of post processes, and monitoring on set can be a challenge. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe it was an instant unanimous decision, everyone wants black and white, but usually the overlords of a studio fight against it. Maybe most famously recently was Mad Max Fury Road, all composed and shot on set, everyone viewing in black and white, but then the studio going, nah, it's going to be in color. So talk a little bit about how black and white comes into this movie, and if it was just, this is how it's going to be from the beginning. Was there the thought like, oh, well, we could always release a color version if we wanted to, and then also the aspect ratio. But we'll get into the aspect ratio in a second. So tell me about black and white.
Yeah, the black and white was always in Rebecca's mind. She was not happy to make this movie unless it was in black and white. So she actually rejected some bigger offers, more money involved offers that were in color, just because she was very clear that she needed to tell this story in black and white and 4:3 until some producers kind of accepted and greenlit that budget. She didn't stop. And so when I came in, the movie was already greenlit, so I didn't need to argue with anyone. I would just had to smile and have that feeling of relief, like, wow, what a great idea, what a great way of telling this story, because I felt it had also to be in black and white because it was essential to the storytelling and the narrative. Having said that, we used the Alexa Mini, the normal Alexa 3.2K, and we just desaturated everywhere. We never saw an image in color for the whole shoot, except a couple of hiccups of technicalities that an image will come on set and will be in color, and suddenly we'll all be like, no, the devil, no, we don't want it in color. But that was it. Basically, we always saw it in black and white, So, but funny enough, like, we were so sure that, that we wanted it to be black and white that we actually painted, the main house, the walls. We had to paint the walls because they were white and we wanted them darker. And, and we had to decide the color, and we went like, you know what? Let's paint them red, very ugly red, because it's very easy to select, in post and just do whatever you want in terms of darkness and brightness in those walls. But also, just to make sure that we've heard all those horror stories about movies shot in black and white turning to color, and we just wanted to make sure that this movie was never going to be seen in color because it would be so ugly, to see those red walls. That was like, it was unbearable. So it was one of those things that it just like never happened. And lucky enough, the people who bought the movie loved it the way it was and never even cared of color version, because it also never made sense anyway. So we're all on board on this. And then the aspect ratio, it's like, it was always like that. Rebecca wanted to be 4:3, not only to remind her of all classical movies, but also it felt like 4:3 was more character based. It was more center, made the characters more center, and that's, and more intimate. So it felt kind of the right thing for this story, and it felt like it kind of elevated the experience of the viewer, and put it more into Irene's subjective eyes and world,
So 4:3, you mentioned a feeling of claustrophobia, and that definitely comes through. And there are some wide shots in the movie, particularly establishing shots, outside of buildings and things like that. But one of the things I noticed quite a bit about your composition in this movie is that there are not a lot of wides. There's a lot of mediums, there's a lot of close-ups, and I'm assuming that's also to help enhance that feeling of claustrophobia. And I'm just wondering if this was all very much intentional from the beginning. We're going to try and refrain from the big wide masters as much as we can, and maybe make them more contained masters that feel more like a medium shot. What can you tell me at all about the composition process?
Yeah, I mean, like Rebecca did this amazing thing that she kind of drew the whole movie, and she kind of just did this kind of very rough drawings of it all that were like, kind of, I want this to tell the story like this. And like me, she's not very good at drawing, but it did really work as a starting tool of how to tell the story and the kind of style that she wanted to create.
I don't usually mention my favorite shot or shots in a movie, but I feel compelled. I have to mention now, especially after hearing your description of 4:3. Tessa Thompson, Irene, her character falls asleep, takes a nap essentially 3 times, I think, in this movie, and each time is like woken up by the sound of, I think, of a grandfather clock that disturbs her sleep. And she's in a very simple chair. She's napping with just her head sort of slightly tilted to the side. And she's lit. It seems entirely motivated from window light that comes in. It's like this is a reoccurring small note about her character. It's like, she lives her life, but she has these moments where she kind of drifts off into sleep, and then she's woken up by the clock each time. The framing and the lighting is so beautiful in each of those. And it's interesting too, because the first time we see her, she's sort of in a medium close. The second time's more of a medium, and the third is a wide shot. And on each one of them, the first one I saw, I thought was just incredibly lovely. And then I was very pleased when I got to see it again. But from a slightly different perspective. And then, of course, for a second, I was like, am I having a quick flashback to the previous time we saw that? Oh, no, this story is continuing. But now I'm getting this extra depth and extra insight into to Irene, that she takes these naps. And then by the time the third one comes along, and it's almost just like this amuse-bouche. It's just like this little taste of something. It's like it almost implies like there is a deeper, bigger thing. It's not necessarily addressed. It's just part of the story. It's part of the character, and it feels like such a wonderful little moment of respite that happens. But then she's, I won't say startled awake, but awoken by this clock chime. Can you talk at all about how those little moments came about? And maybe I'm missing something here. What can you talk about that shot or that repeated theme?
No, absolutely. Actually, it's very interesting. It's like Irene's character is someone that is very limited by all the rules of the society she lives in. But in a way, she's also not exteriorizing her feelings, and she's not expressing them in any way, And I think those naps and the movie talks a lot about the quotidianity, about the daily life, about the repetition of things as time passes. Also as a housewife, for no better term, housewife in a upper middle class black neighborhood, So it's like it's those moments that we've kind of been, just because they are not exciting, they are not dramatic, they are not something kind of epic, they have been excluded from popular culture in history, in the history of literature and history of films especially, So for us, quotidianity and repetition was very important. And just kind of that boredom that comes with doing every day the same thing. But in every time we see it, this quotidianity and this repetition, that it also happens as she walks home, for example, that we see it 4 or 5 times, it's always somewhat different. There's always nuances in the performance, in the leaves of the trees, in the way she, every little thing kind of changes those little moments. So I think the nap is a bit of a combination of those two things. One is the quotidianity and the repetition and the boredom, but it's also Irene's character kind of drifting away from reality and thinking something else that, we might not, or dreaming something else that we might not know, but somewhat our imagination goes flying and goes somewhere that it's interesting. That it's like, oh, what must she be dreaming? And it's true that those dreams, those elevated thoughts are kind of always destroyed by the noise of reality, of a clock or a phone or something happening that awakes her, So it's a little gasp of everyone's life, everyday lives. And it's something that we took a bit more time in composing, in respecting, in kind of shining a light in a different way, And every day, as you say, every day is a little bit different, but also a little bit the same,
Well, I just love it. It's really, really a beautiful shot, and I'm so glad that it made the movie. It's so easy for those sorts of things to end up on cutting room floors too, but it's like there was real intention with it, and the lighting in particular that's falling on Tessa Thompson in that chair is spectacular. So, hey, Edu, I want to move on actually though and talk about I want to talk about you, and I want to talk about your career. And I know that you started young. I know you're from Barcelona, but tell me how you got the bug for this. How did you first realize that cinematography could be a career for you? How could it, where did this come from?
I was a pretty athletic guy when I was at high school, and I was like the kind of guy that was very good at basketball, and I would win every single race, but at some point I started to be bullied at school, and I started to just kind of go and hang out a lot more with clever people that were, my best friend Armand and the girls at school, not like the basic guys. And suddenly, like hanging out with them, I also just kind of sparking my creativity. And I started talking with Armand, my best friend. One day, when we were 13, we're like, oh, it would be so good to do cinema. And it was like, it's such a weird thing to even be thinking of a career of cinema when you're in Spain in the 90s, But he sparkled that, and he was lucky that 4 years later the cinema university was created in Barcelona, and it was actually amazing. And I joined the cinematography course in there after a few years. I was 18 back then, and I didn't know what I was doing, but then I started, working every short I could and everywhere I could. And suddenly I was in a short film being basically the runner, serving food and so on. And suddenly there was these guys, one of them was Arnau Valls, who was the DP. And I was like, he was in the fourth year, and those cinematography guys, they look the coolest. They look having the most fun. They were having a blast on set, and not only telling the story, we're also, kind of running the show and having a great time, and they were enjoying their job. So I was like very fascinated by that bunch of people. And then suddenly it's just like, oh, I want to be a cinematographer. I want to have fun. I don't want to be, in production, and I always thought, directing was too difficult and too, specific for me. And, I think cinematography ticked a lot of my boxes of what I could do and so on, and it was just working very hard, being in a lot of short films for free for a long time, and kind of learning. I was not very skillful at first, but
who is?
I just worked.
It's really difficult.
Exactly,
to jump into
like there was, you just like work very hard, and that's the way in. Like I always remember that there were some people that were very good with cameras at the beginning, but they just took it for granted, and the ones who worked harder and just were passionate, just started standing out. And I went to film school in Barcelona, which was amazing, SCAG, and then I went to NFTS in London, which was also amazing in a different way. It was a lot more experienced teachers and a lot more of an industry. And I learned English, although it's still not great, my English, but I learned how to communicate and shoot in English. So that helped me a bunch, and and obviously helped my career to go international, which obviously. But I did my first film at 23, a very low-budget film called Honor de Caballeria, that went into Cannes. It was like $10,000 budget, and went into Cannes, shot in mini DV. But I continued studying and did 2 more movies, and then basically Tom Ford changed my life. I
was going to ask you about that next. So it's you talk about like those moments of breakthrough in people's careers where they're toiling away, and then suddenly something happens. How did Tom? How did he find you?
It was a combination of things. I was in a line in the Edinburgh Film Festival at 12 o'clock at night on my 5th movie that day. I was alone, and I started talking to the person next to me, who happened to be a producer with an amazing documentary called Billy the Kid in it. And we start talking, we became friends, we saw the movie together, and after a while, and that movie, I was in the festival because I shot a very weird documentary in the North Pole with a friend of mine, Ed Edwards, which kind of randomly, and so
sounds
it was
like
all
there's a
kind
story
of
behind that.
random. Yeah, no, there's a lot of stories around that, but it was random. And suddenly 1 year later, happened that I was offered a movie in Spain, a $1 million movie that I was about to take, and then suddenly there was a light in me that said, you know what, this is the wrong movie for you. You don't understand this movie. You should not do it. And I despite not having any other offers, I just didn't take that movie and accepted all the criticisms from my friends and my DP friends saying, "Are you crazy? When are you gonna get offered a movie? Like this?" And I walked away and went to New York and met again the Cem Karasawa, the person I met in the line in Edinburgh Film Festival. I gave him a reel, and it happened that 2 weeks later she received a call from Tom Ford's producer Bob Salerno saying, "Hey, we've seen everyone's reel in LA. Tom doesn't like anyone. He's looking for some young, bold European, available, cheap, fast DP. Do you have any suggestions?"
I like that you ticked all the boxes there.
And she just kind of had my reel. She FedExed it to them. She tried to contact me, but I was not answering, my emails or something. And suddenly one day they call me and say, "Hey, Tom Ford's just seen," it landed in Tom Ford's desk. And Tom Ford at lunchtime was bored, put my reel on. And after 2 minutes of show reel that had no success in the previous 2 years, I was, not working a lot. He just saw some very allegorical, poetic, grainy, soft, 60mm handheld images and just fell in love with that and just say, "I want this guy." And they call me and say, "Hey, Tom Ford wants you." And it's like, I'm a 27-year-old guy from Spain that never been in America. It's like, okay, just come on, then get on a plane. If Tom Ford likes you for the movie, you got the job. Your first choice. So I jumped on a plane, left everything behind, and got a bag with enough clothes for 2 days or 2 months. And after 2 minutes of talking to Tom, it was obvious that we had a connection. And after an hour, he gave me the movie and completely changed my life. And I was a single man when I was 27, and I was shooting my first movie in America, my first movie on 35. My first movie, with my favorite actress, Julianne Moore. So it's one of those stories that never happened, but it just happened to me. It was one of those that it's just like he was in charge and he could take bold choices, and a first-time director choosing almost a first-time DP, very young first-time DP. Those things never happen. But it did happen to me because there was a brave, very talented man that saw something in my reel, So I started Tom Ford, 5 weeks before starting principal photography,
That's really great, and it's great that you describe your reel too as like this grainy 16mm. I don't know, you didn't say handheld, but I'm imagining handheld when you say that. So and so many DPs I know they say, "Oh, I never get a job for my reel. I make this thing, I send it out, but it's never the reel that actually gets me the work." And your career changes entirely because of your reel. Your reel happened to be in the right place at the right time, and it happened.
It's crazy to think that a director can go for a DP that young with such little experience, not great English, I didn't have a visa or I wasn't in the union at that, so suddenly I was doing a $5 million movie shooting in 35 in LA, with Colin Firth and Julianne Moore. Not bad,
No, not bad at all, and especially with so much like buzz about that movie too, which is really good. Actually, the first time though that your work came to my attention was Buried. I saw Buried, and I knew it was like 90% taking place in a box, and I have to imagine that presented it's a very unique challenge, and you pull it off beautifully. And I know when I was watching it, I was guessing, I was like, they must have like 7 or 8 different size boxes. They must have these boxes where like the panels come off. They must have it must have been a very elaborate, simple set that it was not simple at all when you realize all the things that had to go into that, just because there'd be no way to physically fit the camera in the box how it was supposed to be. You had to get creative. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that Buried presented?
Yeah, it still remains one of my favorite movies I've done, just because of the challenge, but also, what we achieve. It's a very, very fun and enjoyable movie to watch. And it's a thriller in a box. We never leave the box. We shot all in a stage in Barcelona for, I think it was 15 or 18 days. Very quickly on 35, and it was just like Yes, exactly. You get it right. It was 7 boxes that we had, different ones for different shots, for different technicalities. One was very long, one was wider, one was, so every shot had a different thing. One could, you could remove the walls up and down as you rotate the camera, So it was like very stressful, very difficult, very challenging. And, again, that was like, I was 28, not that much experience, and shooting in a very, very low light situation, very contained space with Ryan Reynolds starring, like a major actor. And it was amazing. It was like one of those movies that like, it also completely changed my life. And it was like, suddenly I felt like, wow, what we achieved here is it actually never going to be done again, that anyone shoots a movie in a smaller more contained space than this, so. And it's like it was also very challenging and inspiring every day to come on set, because it was like every day will be like, let's do something different, let's change the rules, let's do a water, we'll be changing every day. Every scene will be a different setup, and we kind of promise ourselves never to repeat a setup. You never, for a different scene, we'll never repeat. Obviously, in the edit, the shots get played twice, but we never, when we change scene, we never do the same shot. We will always find something else, a different way of telling the story, and that was kind of fascinating and thrilling, and and very inspiring, as a filmmaker,
Yeah, I would say so. And I feel like you really thrive when some of the stuff that we take for granted in cinema is taken away from you. Like you've taken away beautiful vistas and scenes. You've taken away, all kinds of things. You're working in just these few elements. And I have to say that in passing, you got such great visuals out of situations where there wasn't a lot of extra dressing going on. I don't mean necessarily in front of the camera, but like it's very sparse musically. Your visuals are telling the story. I don't know if it's this removing of elements in which you're thriving, but and removing things in passing like a color and that sort. But I feel like you're very skilled at taking limitations and turning them into assets.
I always think that it's good to take risks in filmmaking. I always feel like it's kind of one of the most exciting and thrilling things about making films. Is kind of not taking anything for granted, taking risks, suffering a little bit, just because of of the choices you make, and that always kind of sparks creativity, sparks the audience to be more intelligent and you to do better work. And I always feel like if I take risk, if I suffer, if I it means that I am passionate about what I'm doing, that I'm like like I'm taking a stand, I'm taking a choice, I'm making a strong choice. And that's always I call it losing her. If I lose her because of the nerves of doing something, it's a good thing. It just means that I'm there, and I'll become bold eventually, but and soon. But that's all for a good reason. I'm just suffering for the beauty of making good films. So it's like and you're right. I mean, I tried not to repeat myself and try not to do the same movie again and again, but just keep changing, keep learning, keep growing, keep kind of putting myself into different challenges, different views of the world, different directors' visions, and trying to just making a filmography that is not about me. It's about films and characters and telling those stories.
I think that's wonderful. And there's a part of me that just kind of wants to say, that's a wonderful place to leave this interview. We should just wrap it up right here. I don't think you can say anything that's more wonderful than that, but I do want to talk to you about at least one more thing, which is your commercial work. And now we've talked about the art and the love and your passion, but a lot of people will say that the commercial work that they do is more like commerce. It's like, there may not necessarily be the same excitement over selling a new car versus or a new cologne or whatever it is over. But I will tell you, your commercial career, and I'm guessing that it came after your feature career, because for a lot of people, it doesn't go that way. Usually they will have commercials before they get to move into features. But I'm getting the suspicion that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that you establish yourself as a feature DP, and then all of these other people said, oh, we want that guy. We want that guy to come make these commercials. And you've done Super Bowl spots and car commercials and cologne commercials and a Star Wars car commercial and all kinds of just beautiful, fantastic projects that, they don't have your name on it, at least not when it goes out into the world. And it's commerce. It's about selling a product. It's about telling a little contained story. How does that passion for filmmaking change? Or maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe you're just as passionate about telling a commercial for Uber Eats as you are for all these stories. Well, tell me about and commercials.
It's not the same. It's obviously, you're putting a bit of your soul into selling a product, and it's not as pure feeling as making a film, obviously, but there is something that that it's a joy about being a DP, is that you can jump from one thing to the other, and especially if you have a feature film career and they want you in commercials, that's really basically it's a great way of spending your time off of movies. It's a great way of schedule, and it's a great possibility of staying with your family, which is very important and very difficult being a DP. So it's obviously a money maker as well, but it's also sometimes you also find directors, find crew, find tools that you can also apply for filmmaking, because filmmaking is as well a muscle that you must exercise. You must learn. So it's a great way of spending time and choosing your best project to be next. And not being as anxious to go from feature to feature, because features I put the soul into a feature. It's 3 months that I don't see my friends, my parents, or my family, and I'm just there. And it's very difficult to keep having a normal life doing feature after feature, so it's a joy, and there's not many jobs in life that you can have that kind of both sides, that you can be doing an artistic thing but also the next day jump into a very commercial that pays you very well thing, and you don't put your name on it. So it's it's pretty a good deal for a DP, to be honest.
100%. Most DPs I know wish that they had more commercials, wish that they had more stuff, even though they don't necessarily get any fame when it airs. Usually the schedules are better. They get to sleep in their own beds sometimes. They get to have a decent paycheck. All of those things come with it, which is wonderful. So before we wrap this up, though, Edu, are you on social media at all? Where can people find you online?
My website is the best place to see my work. It's edugrau.com, edugrau.com. And I'm in Instagram, but I'm not the best at it. I just put a lot of stuff from my life and just not a lot of things of my movies or my projects. But, if you want to get a grasp of who I am, Eduard Grau on Instagram or Edu Grau on Facebook, I'm there. And talk to me. I'm nice. And if you write to me, I'll answer.
If they're listening to the sound of my voice, I'm sure they will. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So that was Edu Grau. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Edu.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. Can't wait to have you back on again.
And now, short ends.
So Ilya, now it is our time for our patent pending short ends segment. What is your patent pending short end?
Wow. Well, there was some data that was just released regarding Black Friday. Black Friday, this whole sort of end of November is the time when the consumers of America consume. They spend their money, they go out there, and sure enough,
we've been well trained. From childhood, this is when we do it.
The Black Friday weekend, the estimate was that I heard on the radio the other day was $6 billion has been spent in the U.S., which seems to be extremely high for 2 or 3 shopping days. $6 billion is the estimate. So in light of this, I feel like I should really actually tout
prices
something.
Aren't going to be this low until after Christmas, a month from now. So might as well.
I was going to say Black Friday is now basically seems like it's the entire month of November. Mm-hmm. And I think that people have gotten pretty liberal on this, and the days of oh no, it's going to be a sale for 12 hours and then it's over.
Black Friday is the most ominous thing to call a day.
Yeah, it really is.
It doesn't sound like a positive thing, Black Friday. It sounds like, oh yeah, it's the day where, you wake up and there's a kobold standing on your chest, pointing at your face and shrieking at you in the morning.
I wonder what they think in Ireland of America having a Black Friday when they've got like a Bloody Sunday and they've got all of these terrible, these horrible things associated with these names. Truthfully and scarily, there are people who die every year on Black Friday being trampled in rushes for consumption. So it's happened.
But that's
all
changed now that Black Friday is such an online phenomenon. You're not going to get trampled by your computer, hopefully.
Oh man,
if you are, you're using it wrong.
Oh, okay. So that's all preamble. I want to talk about something I've actually talked about on the show before, which is actually a light from it's a Chinese light with a German sounding spelling of a name, but it's pronounced ProLight, PROLYCHT. And if you go to Hot Rod Cameras, you'll see it on the homepage somewhere there. They are doing probably the best Black Friday thing I've ever heard or seen or come across. And I have to give a shout out right now. They only have a few dealers. Hot Rod Cameras is one of them. But their flagship product, which is the 300FS, they call it the Orion 300FS. It is essentially a 300 watt LED 6-color light, and it basically uses the same sort of light engine as like the very expensive Airy Orbiter, but it's actually brighter than the Orbiter, at least at 5600. And it has all these really amazing colors that it can put together. And it like, for example, the white setting on the light, even though there's no white LEDs, it makes it with all these colors. It goes from 2,000 to 20,000, which is the largest, widest range of any light out there. And it's about the same size as like an Aperture 300 product. It costs $2,150 and has a bunch of relatively affordable accessories to go with it. But the deal that ProLight is doing, and I haven't seen anyone do this, but we've already sold a bunch of these lights, is you buy two and you get a third one free, which is like a $2,000+ value. And so we have some clients
buy two, get one free, and then turn around and sell that one. Jesus Christ.
You could just do that too. And then actually, I didn't want to give anyone this suggestion, but yes, then you could amortize your expense. But I will tell you that people out there who have grip trucks, Sprinter vans, that sort of stuff, I should say electric trucks, any sort of small package, and they still have a bunch of tungsten units, this light is a pretty incredible tungsten replacement and not a real sacrifice. I mean, the quality of the tungsten light is brilliant. And just for shits and grins, you get red, green, and blue and all these other colors. Plus, it's got all the gels pre-programmed into it. It's got a light color picker where you can use your phone, point it at any light source, and it'll match it.
Wow.
It's got a bunch of really, really good stuff. And
that is some science fiction shit right there, man.
And it's all made of metal, and taking nothing away from other lighting manufacturers out there that are not doing all metal housings. I mean, this thing's made rough and tough. It's made to be, be able to be used. We've been talking to a lot of different lighting houses lately, and they are all very interested in this light, or have been picking it up, and some people have renting it. And but I'll tell you, I think that the people who are sort of like the owner-operator trucks right now, and they want a light that can kind of stand in to do a lot of work, especially like lights, like, LEDs have not done a great job on the tungsten side. And there's some people out there who still want to keep using tungsten. Now that this LED has come along, there's really, I don't think, a lot of reason to hold on to those, especially since they're super efficient. They don't take much power. They have a bunch of cool accessories, including a little Lico attachment, which is just brilliant. So the ProLight Orion 300FS, brilliant light, $2,000. You buy two of them, you get a third one free, and you could fill up a cart of these really easily, and you could light basically anything because the light can kind of do anything. You could even gang them together. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with it. So anyway, really like it. It's totally worth it. And this is the best Black Friday deal I think I've ever seen on any sort of lighting product. So it's a big deal.
Sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah. So Ben, what's your short end this week? What do you got going on?
I stumbled across an app that I think is a really cool app. And I think I've spoken on here about like writing, collaborative writing apps, not screenwriting apps, but the pre-work of writing, which, in the projects I've done is a lot of index cards on corkboards moving around. And when COVID hit, Bob DeRosa and I, we've worked on several projects together, we were in the middle of writing a project that we hopefully will soon be able to talk about. We've already been recording it. It's an audio project. And I was struggling to find the replacement for the index cards on the corkboard. And I settled on a thing called Miro that's kind of a mind mapping, whatever, kind of brainstorming software that's easily used by more than one person. But recently I stumbled across something called Writer's Room Pro, which costs about the same as Miro. So
subscription, or you buy it once?
It is a subscription, and I wish it was something I could just buy. But it's like $9 a month. That's for one person. If it's two people, it's $18 a month. And if it's more than that, they say, contact them directly and they'll kind of work it out with you. So I'm assuming that it's probably about $9 per seat. But if you look it up, and it's just writersroompro.com, and we're not being sponsored by them or anything, I just think it's a really interesting thing, because they've taken all of the character boards and episode boards and all the stuff that you would do, and they've made it completely online. But also they've made it so that if you were in a writer's room, and in a lot of these writers' rooms, they'll just have a big screen TV that they're throwing the cards to. Well, now you can use that interactively on one of those screens. And it's designed to work with desktops, laptops, tablets, and phones. So you can use it on virtually anything. And I believe it's Mac and Android and PC and whatever. It's very feature packed. And I was right after I found it, I reached out to Bob and I was like, hey, and he's like, yeah, if we have another project come up, soon, we might even try using it. Again, even like Bob and I are both, thrice vaccinated and not afraid to work in the same room, but we might use that instead of the index card corkboard pushpin situation, because, you can really injure yourself on those push pins. But
yeah, they're deadly.
More than that, like, this thing generates episode outlines, and it automates a lot of the stupid work that you end up having to do, compiling stuff and making lists and blah, blah, blah. I wonder if it was an opportunistic thing or if it was something that was already in the works, because it came out about a year ago. So it was during the pandemic that this thing first surfaced. But writers' rooms are probably going to eventually go back to being somewhat in person. But I do think that probably in some instances, depending on who the writers are, depending on who the showrunner is, you might have half the team in New York and half the team in LA, or you might have, one writer in Lexington, Kentucky, and one writer in Europe somewhere. You basically could bring other people in. And because it's a cloud-based thing, it appears to be fully interactive. So anyone can write a card or move a card around or whatever, annotate stuff. And I think if you're looking to write specifically with a group of people or even one co-writer, which is not unusual, I think it's at least worth checking out.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds really cool. I would totally check that out. We should also probably give a quick shout out to our fine people over at Assemble.tv. Assemble.tv, if you have not heard us talk about it, go back and listen to one of our other shows. We talk about Assemble TV a bunch, but it's a brilliant, brilliant cloud-based app, and you can get a month free courtesy of the Cinematography podcast by entering the promo code Cinepod, CINEPOD. Get a free month of Assemble.tv.
Yeah, and I don't feel like this steps on Assemble.tv's toes at all, because I don't think Assemble and this do the same thing.
No, not at all.
All right, well, Ilya, where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me over at Hot Red Cameras, hotredcameras.com. We are there Monday through Friday. And if you have questions or need gear type of advice, or actually need to buy gear, call my team, call me, ask for me, no problem. And if you're a fan of the show, come in, and we have a few shirts left. You can get a Hot Red Cameras shirt
Angrily
for free.
Demand a shirt.
If you angrily demand it, they might throw you out. My team is a little salty too.
No, not if you're a paying customer, man.
If you're that angry, I've told them. I've given them carte blanche.
What if they're kind of curt in their request?
Well,
hey, Ilya, can I get the shirt that you said you'd give me? Like, if they said it like that, would you kick them out for that, or would you just kind of give them some
that's not the same thing. You when you say angrily demand, it's not.
No, I'm like saying where's the line? Like, at what point is when they walk in?
The line is,
hey, motherfucker, give me my
offense.
fucking shirt.
Yeah, that's it. If they go there, or if they're personally offensive to one of the fine people at work there, then yeah, you're. Not
don't offend anyone. But,
Yeah.
Usually
but I feel like people are really nice. Usually when they're asking for a shirt, they're not angry. They're happy.
They're getting a shirt, man. They're getting free clothing.
And I took a look. We've got something basically between 2X and small. So we got something between 2X and small for most people. So that's good. Yeah. No XS. Nothing.
I need to get one of those shirts. I don't think I have one of your shirts. Do I have?
If you ever emerge from your cave and come on out to Burbank, no problem. Got you. Oh
man, that's like a 15-minute drive for me. I don't know if I can really handle that.
You might have to go there for some other reason. You never know.
You never know. So you can find me at Ben Rock online, but mostly, like I've been saying, you can find me on Facebook at the group Needs a Werewolf. Please feel free to join it and pitch your ideas for what movies, TV shows, plays, songs, novels could use a werewolf and, pitch your story. We're up to 500 members.
I am not
500 members on my stupid werewolf group.
I am not a member, but I saw you repost something. It flew by my feed. Someone had posted like an actual werewolf movie inside of Where Needs a Werewolf. I thought that was pretty funny. So.
Yeah, no. Honestly, some werewolf movies need more werewolf.
Gotcha. Okay.
I got to be honest. There are great werewolf movies, but then sometimes you watch a werewolf movie and you're like,
where was the werewolf?
The boat on the amount of werewolf. And we're recording this, by the way, today as we're recording is Joe Dante's birthday, director of, among many amazing movies, The Howling, which is absolutely my favorite werewolf movie ever made.
Nice. Well, I don't think I've ever seen it. I know. American Werewolf in London, but have not seen Howling.
Came out the same year as American Werewolf in London, and I love American Werewolf in London. I will take The Howling over American Werewolf in London.
That transformation sequence, though, in American Werewolf in London.
The transformation sequences in The Howling, I think, are just as impressive. And they are made by... So Rick Baker did the transformation sequence in American Werewolf in London, famously. And one of his proteges is a guy named Rob Bottin, who also did all the special effects for The Thing, the John Carpenter movie, just 1 year later. And he did the transformation effects for The Howling. And it's a very different kind of transformation. Not to get too in the weeds about this, but American Werewolf in London is a body horror movie about how horrible it is to turn into a werewolf. The Howling is about how awesome it is to be a werewolf, and our hero turns away from that call to become a werewolf.
Joe Dante's got some other really incredible movies too. We should just mention
Gremlins,
too, like Inner Space, yes, Gremlins,
Matinee. No, Joe Dante's an amazing filmmaker.
The Burbs. You remember The Burbs?
I love The Burbs. Yes, I love his work. The Howling will probably be always my favorite of all of his films. Just love it.
Well, I was going to say Tom Hanks, his star really got shiny after The Burbs. It really did. It was shiny before. I mean,
The Burbs is great. Honestly, Joe Dante is like one of the greats in terms of balancing horror, real scary horror with absurd comedy. And probably Gremlins is the movie that encapsulates that the best. He's just a rock solid filmmaker, and he makes movies that I love. And The Howling, which is, I think, his first film after, because he was a Roger Corman guy. After he got out of Corman University, I think that was his first major film. He made the original Piranha.
Yeah, I remember Piranha. That is one.
James Cameron made the sequel.
Piranha 2. All right. Well, hey, we should wrap this up. Ben, who should we thank?
As always, we should thank Alana Cody, first and foremost, our intrepid producer, kicking all the ass, getting us interviews. We have some really cool interviews coming up very soon. We should, as always, thank Ben Katz. Hopefully this week we haven't made his life too difficult, but, I'm always afraid that I'm going to sound like an idiot. So Ben is our backstop. He's our last best hope for not sounding stupid. And lastly, we should thank Kays and congratulate Kays Alatrakshi, who composed every scrap of music you heard in this episode. Kays just directed a project in Atlanta. I don't know if he's allowed to talk about what it is, but it is an episode of a bigger project for somebody else. And he just went off to Atlanta and directed it. So
nice.
Further completing my theory that he doesn't need any of us. He directs, he does visual effects, he does color correction, and he is a kick-ass composer.
Yeah, I'm pretty much convinced that he's going to Jim Cameron all of us. He's going to
all of us.
Yeah, he's going
to hire us all and then fire us and do our job better than we were doing it beforehand.
That's right. It's lonely at the top that way, not having any help, but no.
Heavy weighs the crown.
All right, Ben, I think that's just about going to do it for another edition of the Cinematography Podcast, this time with a lot of slappy, happy talk here at the end, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Okay, maybe I would. All right.
A little bit. But we'll see what Ben leaves in the show.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, well, we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.